Breakdown Learning Podcast, a show dedicated to exploring home education and beyond during the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm your host, Mark Gallivan, a father and a staff member at a self-directed school in Colorado, USA called Alpine Valley School.
And I'm your other host, Kate Coleman, a mother to 3 boys and also a staff member at an alternative school in the UK called East Kent Sudbury School. Today's episode focuses on children with special needs, particularly those who have been labelled with behavioural problems in more mainstream education.
There are a lot of kids out there who do not fit inside the box, and many of them refuse to try. We believe that's actually a good thing, and so does our guest today, Dr. Naomi Fisher. Dr. Fisher has appeared on our show before in episode 2, where we talked about mental health and well-being during the pandemic.
Part of her role as a clinical psychologist has been to work with children who are branded as problem children or troublemakers by the school system. Dr. Fisher has a very unique take on people who don't fit the mould, and I'm very glad to be able to share it with you on today's episode. She also shares some great resources if you want to do more reading on your own, which we'll share links to in the show notes.
Here's Dr. Naomi Fisher talking about educating kids with special needs.
My name's Naomi Fisher. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I'm also the mother of 2 young people who had been self-directed from the start. And my work as a clinical psychologist has brought me in touch with lots of children who aren't very happy at school. So my experience of education growing up was quite unusual. I started primary school and I absolutely hated it. I just found the whole process utterly tedious and alienating, and I hated the primary school. So pretty quickly, I was kicking and screaming on the way to primary school, and this wasn't really what my parents had in mind for me. I was like quite an academic child. I was very capable, and I hated school. So they pulled me out. Then my parents moved to Botswana, but they worked in international development. So through my childhood, we lived in Botswana, we lived in South Africa briefly, and then we lived in what was Zaire. So I actually moved schools, and I went to 11 different schools from the time of being 5 to being the time of 18. And one of the things that I noticed moving from school to school was that they all had a really different approach, but they all believed that what they did was the best way to do it. But yet it never really seemed to matter. So I think I ended school with a really healthy skepticism about many of the things people say about school, because I hadn't followed any curriculum consecutively. I hadn't done all this linear process that you're meant to do in order to get through school, and yet it didn't matter. It seemed to me I came out at the end of school, I did okay, I went to university, I now have a bachelor's degree, I have 2 doctoral degrees, and I don't go back and think, oh gosh, those gaps in my education, how am I ever going to catch them up? I think it's part of our mindset as professionals, certainly as psychologists, that the best place for a child is at school. So we do have the sense that in the same way as we might be trying to encourage an adult to get back to work, we try and encourage a child to get back to school. So much of what children learn is about the environment around them. And yet somehow, when it comes to children who are struggling with school, we ignore the effects of the environment on them and we say this is about this disordered child. And maybe this disordered child needs special treatment or they need extra support, but no one ever says, but hang on, maybe there's an interaction between the school and the child, which absolutely is not working. And maybe if we started from the premise that this child is as they are, this is how they were born. And what about if it was about thinking about how we can find the right environment for each child rather than how can we make each child fit this school environment? So we're saying a lot of children in each class need extra support to deal with school. And the mainstream school system doesn't fit for at a minimum, these 15%, because these 15% are the children whose difference is so obvious that they're ending up being diagnosed in some way or being sent for reports and being classified as having special educational needs. Of course, there are lots of other children whose behaviour isn't so serious or are hiding the damage that school is doing to them, and they don't get involved in that 15%. And I think when we talk about those children as disordered, that lets us, society, off the hook, because we're like, okay, well, there are these children who are special. They're different. They don't fit in. They need whatever. They need medication, or they need wobble cushions to sit on, or they need special movement breaks every hour so they can go out and run around the playground because they're different. Not like everyone else, the 85% who aren't making this fuss. But I think that you can see these 15% as the children who are sounding the klaxon for everybody else. And there's a great book, which I'd recommend to everybody, by Carla Shalaby, called Troublemakers. It's an American book. She calls them canaries in the mine. She says, these children are showing us what this process is like. She has this great quote where she says, should we be telling them not to? Why are we, they are saying there's something wrong here. There's something toxic in this environment. And what we're saying is, shh, there's something wrong with you. It's not the environment. And actually, what if they're right? It would blow the whole thing apart if we started listening to those children's behaviour and saying, this is communication, what these children are telling us. Really, the ones with the special educational needs are the ones who we need to thank, because they're telling us, they're sounding the alarm for everybody else. The other difficulty I have with these diagnoses, I was saying to you, is like saying this child is different. Okay, so now this child has all sorts of different things that they can do, because we acknowledge that they are different and they don't fit in. And I can't quite understand how, but I think it's part of the medicalization of behaviour, that we need to see behaviour as a medical problem. And there's a clinical psychologist called Mary Boyle who talks about the brain or blame dichotomy that we set people up with, that either there's something wrong with your brain or it's your fault. And those are the only two options. It's either that they've got a brain disorder, okay, diagnosis, or it's their fault. And if it's their fault or the parent's fault, then the answer is punishment and control. And there's no third option. But the problem with doing that is we define a set of children as different and therefore having different needs, but we leave the rest of them assuming that that isn't a problem, because we have basically put these children in a category of their own. And we need that third option. We need the option that says there's something going wrong between this child and their environment. How are we going to change this? How are we going to work around this so that this child can thrive without being either told it's their fault or there's something wrong with their brain? It's easy to not notice all these power imbalances because we're so used to it. It's just part of the air we breathe. School culture is everywhere around us. We train children to this. We start it off quite gently when they're small. They go in and it's about play. And gradually we move them more and more towards a system of control. But they do basically give up control when they go in through the door of that school. And actually their parents give up control as well. I could no longer say, I don't want my child punished. And the child also can no longer say, this is how I want to be treated. Everything about their life is controlled. And we expect children to put up with that. And I think that isn't something that most adults would tolerate. I think we train children to lose their autonomy. We take it away from them gradually. And often in primary school, they accept that because they want to please us. And then when they get to secondary school, some of them turn around and they go, hang on a minute, what's going on here? It's not just about the child and the school. I think the parent is a really important part of it, because parents spend so much time with their children. And yet, by the school system, we're told all the time that what parents think about their children is less important than what a school thinks about the child. Why have we got this unequal relationship where the school can dictate things, but the parents can't, the child can't? It's like all the power is being sucked up by the school. So I would really like to see us able to widen our perspective on education so that when we see a child having problems, we can say, well, right, how do we solve this? Where are the difficulties? What's going on? What's working? What's not working? And we need many, many more options than something wrong with the child.
That does it for this episode of the Lockdown Learning Podcast. We would love to hear your feedback if you have any to share. You can contact the show via email at lockdownlearningpodcast@gmail.com. The next episode will be the last of our series, and we so appreciate everyone who has been with us all the way. If you want to catch up on past episodes, you can find Lockdown Learning on your podcast app of choice.
If you, like many of our listeners, are interested in exploring more about home education or alternative schools in your area, check out the links in our show notes for more information. We're putting in lots of resources about Dr. Fisher's work, as well as the books she recommended in her talk. You can also find out more about the schools that Kate and I are associated with by visiting ekss.org.uk for East Kent Sudbury School and alpinevalley.school.com for Alpine Valley School.
In our last episode, we'll be talking about the future of education. What are our hopes for how education will change after the lockdown is over? What choices do parents have when they get ready to send their kids back to school? And for those of us who want to continue to home educate, what's the best way to move forward? We'll be discussing all of that and more on our final episode.
Look for that episode coming next week. In the meantime, we hope that you've enjoyed listening to this show as much as we've enjoyed making it. If you're open to it, we'd really appreciate if you would leave us a review in Apple Podcasts. These reviews can help other people find our show.
Thanks for listening today. I'm Kate.
And I'm Mark. And this is the Lockdown Learning Podcast. Until next time, remember to take a deep breath, hug your kids, and pat yourself on the back because we know you absolutely deserve it. Be well.